Okay. We have a few more coming in as well. Okay, everyone. Okay, we are live and recording. So thank you so much for coming tonight to our Nordic Horizons meeting, our winter meeting on Finnish approach to media and internet literacy and internet savviness. The running order for tonight is that I will just explain briefly to those of you who are new to Nordic Horizons a bit about our organization, some sort of housekeeping, a bit of background to tonight's event, and then I'll just quickly go through the running order and quickly introduce our speakers. You have the option of coming on camera. It's lovely to see people in person, so please do come on camera if you like to, so we can see you. But if it's okay for you to stay on mute, just so we don't get any echoes when people are speaking, that would be fantastic. You will have an opportunity to come off mute and to speak later in the Q&A section of the event. Okay. So for those of you who've not been to a Nordic Horizons event before, we've been going for about 10 years now. We're a cross-party, non-party organisation set up by myself and Leslie Riddick way back in the mists of time on a train to Perth in about 2010 or before. And really what we're interested in is what we can learn from the Nordic model of society and the Nordic policy approaches, mainly for Scotland, but there are lessons for the whole world, indeed, really, from the Nordic approach. We have run something like 60 events, speaking events, with experts from the Nordic countries over the past 10 to 12 years. Mainly in the Scottish Parliament, but of course, since the pandemic, like the rest of the world, we have moved to the online world, which has its advantages, but some drawbacks as well. So one of the things we're very keen on at Nordic Horizons is understanding what we can learn from Nordic approaches to address real life issues, in Scotland, the UK, and beyond. And for this event, I was thinking, well, what is it that really is affecting the world just now? And a big part of what's going wrong, if you like, in the world, I think, is this kind of polarization of views. This sort of retreat from objectivity and expertise that's fueling so much populism and division. And a lot of that is to do with people interacting, getting their information online, and how that can be captured and used for nefarious ends. I thought, I wonder, and I bet the Nordic countries are doing something fantastic to combat this. And lo and behold, of course, they are. And I was not at all surprised to discover that Finland is #1 in the world for internet and media literacy. And so I did a bit of research, and this guy's name, Jussi Toivanen, kept on coming up wherever I looked. And so I watched a couple of YouTube videos of him speaking, and I thought, this guy's fantastic, enthusiastic, knowledgeable, gets the message across. No pressure, you see. I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could get him for one of our events? And I sort of Googled around, found him on LinkedIn. I thought, I'll just send him a message, because you never know. I should say at this point that, as far as I was aware at that point, Jussi was still the advisor to the Finnish Prime Minister on these issues. So I thought, I'll be lucky to land him. Lo and behold, 2 days later, Jussi got back to me very enthusiastically saying, yes, I'd love to do this. So I'm incredibly grateful to you, Jussi, for joining us. And we're really lucky to have you. So thank you so much for joining us. What we're going to do now is I'm just going to basically hand over to Jussi to introduce himself more fully. I will say that he's moved on now to be the head of communications, if I'm right, at the Finnish Institute for Cybersecurity, but he can tell you how he got there. And he'll talk to you a little bit about the Finnish approach to dealing with this issue in terms of the education of the Finnish public and their trust in institutions and what's happening around Russia as well. Also very glad to be joined by Chris Silver, who is a journalist and researcher, currently completing a PhD in memory and the Scottish press. And he's going to sort of respond to Jussi from a Scottish perspective on those issues. And we've also been joined by Claire El Azebi from the Scottish Government Cyber Security team, who's also offered to talk a little bit about her work as well. We'll offer the floor open to everyone after that for questions and comments. To those of you who are not on Zoom but watching on other platforms, really sorry to say we've had a slight technical issue tonight, which means that you won't be able to contact us via the normal route. However, if you can email your comments or questions to, very simply, Nordic Horizons, all one word, at hotmail.co.uk, or you can tweet them to @Nordic Horizons. Leslie Riddick, our director who normally chairs these events, is actually taking a night off tonight, but she will be keeping an eye on Twitter. And Mike Danson, other member of our committee, will be keeping an eye on the Zoom comments and questions as well. That's enough from me. I'd like to hand over to Jussi now. He'll tell you a bit about himself, his work, and talk to us about the Finnish approach to internet and media literacy. Jussi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Greetings, everyone from Helsinki. Thanks for having me. I just said, when you mentioned my background, I started to think about that. When I left the high school back in the 90s, I moved to Germany to study violin. I was about to become a musician, an orchestra violinist. And after 2 years studying there, I decided that it's maybe better to do something else. And if someone would have said back in the 90s that in 2020, I'm talking about disinformation and how the Finnish society is defending itself from different kind of malign information influence activities, I would have laughed. First, a lot of things have changed. I have a shorter hair, and I'm wearing this kind of shirts nowadays. Yeah. But I haven't. I started working in the government communications back in 2009. I was working at that time at the Finnish police headquarters, the National Police Board, and Finnish police was one of the first authorities to open any kind of social media account. So, but it was by 2009, and no one talked about that there might be, of course, there were kind of already kind of minor trolls at the time, but we didn't think so much about that there might be some kind of coordinated action behind that kind of activity targeting the Finnish society as a whole. We thought that they were just individuals raising up their voices, etc. And back that time in 10 years ago, when we talked about social media, we mainly discussed only about the good things social media could provide us: openness, transparency, and the new ways to connect each other, etc. And then 2014 changed quite a lot. Then when Russia attacked Ukraine and illegally annexed Crimea, then became obvious that there are state actors who are also targeting Finland with malign information influence activities. Then, of course, at the time I was working at the Prime Minister's office, and then we were starting to think about that, how should Finland respond to this kind of activities from the government perspective. So first we looked at our school system and thought about that. Of course, media literacy and media education have been part of our official school curriculum since back the 1970s. I remember when I was back in the 80s at school, we already visited news media, their newsrooms, journalists told about their work, etc. So we had already media education at that time. And now when my little daughter went to kindergarten, so they already had media education there. While they were playing using iPads and other tablet computers, the kindergarten teacher taught little children about the magic word, which is behind this glassy box where you can touch and tap and swipe and do things like that. And kind of media education and media literacy, it's kind of a lifelong journey in Finland. So it's also it continues also in adult education. NGOs are playing very important role. It's not only state-funded activity, etc. But as I'm a very boring and grey Finnish civil servant, I like to use PowerPoint slides. So I will show a few of them. Just a moment. I will share my screen a little bit. Think about. Okay, hopefully you can see. There is our national emblem. For me, the lion. It resembles determination. There is a lion ready to strike. But one of my foreign colleagues once asked me that if you look at your national emblem and that the United Nations says that you are the happiest country in the world for, I think, 5 times in a row. So how on earth, if you look at your national emblem, there is a lion hitting his own head with a sword. How on earth can you be the happiest nation in the world? There's been also conspiracy theories that, in fact, Finland, I will switch to a bigger screen, Finland doesn't exist, that Finland is a conspiracy theory. But I can assure you that we are here. We are here up north, between Sweden, Norway, and Russia. And we have over 1,300 kilometers, so 1,000 miles, a joint border with Russia. And for historical reasons, there's been quite a few wars between Russia and Sweden. And for 700 or 800 years, Finland was part of the Kingdom of Sweden. And from 1809 till 1917, Finland was part of the Russian Empire. But usually when we think about a society's resilience and to, for example, disinformation or other malign information influence activities, then usually there are few things that we can learn from each other. But at the end, I think every nation should find their own ways. And for us, Finnishness is the best way. And this is not from the COVID period with social distancing. This picture was taken a couple of years ago. And there's the old stereotype of us Finns that we like to keep our social, we like to keep 1 or 2 meters distant between each other, and very shy people. And then someone took this photo. There was a major snowstorm in Helsinki. And if you look at how the Finns are standing there in a huge snowstorm, there is kind of a geometrical pattern. You can see that there is almost 1.5 meters or 2 meters between each other. Those persons, they don't know each other, but still they want to keep the distance, and they don't look for shelter under the bus stop. But that's the way. And a little brief history of Finland. As I mentioned, Finland was from the 14th century till 1809 part of Sweden, and then there was a war between Sweden and Russia, and from 1809 till 1917, Finland became a Grand Duchy, and it was an autonomous part of Russian Empire. And if you look at the time and the development that Finnish society has gone through, so in the 1850s, Finland was really one of the poorest countries in the world. And then what started, there was a rapid economical growth. And if you look at all the societal circumstances at that time, the child mortality rate was very high. People could not read. So Finland was really poor. And under the Russian rule, 1899, Russia started Russification policy. So there was oppression of Finnish language, or rights or legislation was taken down, etc. But Finns started resistance and protest and against Russia at that time. But then good things also happened. In 1906, universal suffrage is established, and also it included the right for women to stand for elected office. And it was first time in Europe and second in the world. I think New Zealand was the first one. And then finally, in December 1917, Finland became independent state. But it hasn't been a smooth sailing ever since. So immediately after we became independent, 1917, there was a civil war. The communist Red Army tried to seize the power from the legal government, and the Finnish Red Army was supported by the Bolsheviks. And there was 30,000 deaf people, and if you think about at the time, the population of Finland was a little bit over 3 million. That was big. But then good things start to happen after the horrible civil war. There became first kind of idea of a Nordic welfare state. Then child mortality rate dropped, and also the level of income of people started to rise. There were social programs, education, schools, systems started to ramping up, etc. But then came the Second World War, and when we are talking about societal resilience and understanding a society, then it's important to look at history and also the context the nation is living. So Stalin and his generals counted wrong. So when they attacked Finland in 1939 without a declaration of war, and the Winter War started, they miscalculated. They thought that after the Civil War, the Finnish society would be so polarized, so divided, that it would be easy piece of conquer the Finland, and so that 3.1 million people, it is not a resist. They cannot resist so mighty Soviet army. But what my grandfathers and mothers did, so they defended, they stood up, and after 105 days of fierce fighting, the war ended and Finland remained independent. So the Red Army did never enter Helsinki. So, and I think one of the mistakes Stalin and the generals did, that they didn't understand the healing and reconciliation process which started immediately after the Civil War. And it was the society started to develop, and also how the people perceive the Finnish society, even though that there were this polarization between the old communists and the government troops, for example, but still a lot of good things started to happen. And after the Second World War, then of course the Cold War era, Finland was balancing between West and East. So Finland was a capitalist society, democratic society, and but then there was balancing between West and East. And finally, in 1995, Finland became member of the European Union, and now I think there are just two countries, Hungary and Turkey. And when they will ratify the Finland and Sweden's NATO application, then we will be also members of NATO. So it hopefully happens soon. But I met one of my foreign colleagues a little while ago, and I said that when we met last time a year ago, and if I would have said that Finland and Sweden is about to become NATO members, then would you have believed? And he said no. And there is when I'm talking about the Winter War, so what is happening now in Ukraine is fighting, defending their independence against Soviet aggression. So it resembles, and it remembered us, our fight in 1939 and 1940. We were alone fighting against Soviet Union at the time. Poorly equipped army, small country, small nation, but the willingness to defend our country. So we managed to survive and stay independent. One of our old presidents once said that he wrote a book called The Idea of Russia. Our President Koivisto, he passed away 5 years ago. And so after his president period, he wanted to understand Russia better. And then he wrote a book called The Idea of Russia. And when the book was published in Russia about 10 or 15 years ago, then one Russian journalist asked President Koivisto that what's the idea of Finland? And Koivisto's straight answer was to stay alive. That's the idea of Finland. And then also some good things I would like to bring up. So the first Freedom of Information Act in the world dates back to 1776. And it was, at that time, Finland was part of Sweden, and it was Sweden who introduced the first act in 1776. But we always want to give the credit to us Finns, as the Information Act was initiated by a Finnish priest, by Anders Chydenius. And the reason was that when Finland was part of Sweden, so the Finnish statesmen felt that we Finns don't get enough information from Stockholm. So the Stockholm is making decisions which are also targeting us, so that we don't know anything about them. That's why they wanted to know and learn more about the decisions the Swedish government is doing in Stockholm in the 18th century. So that's why the priest understood and started to lobbying that there should be this kind of act. And then again, why, when we are talking about media literacy and media education and the Finnish school system, I think it's been kind of a core idea in our in Finland that why education is important. And one of our old national philosopher and statesman Juha Wilhelm Snellman said back in 19th century, Finland was at the time part of Russia, and then started to develop the idea that one day Finland should become independent. Finland should become, we should be proud of being Finns. So his idea was that the best protection for a small nation is civilization. So education has always played very important role, educating people, civilizing people, and that was kind of kind of the basement of the statehood or nation, also feeling being a Finn or nation state Finland. And if you think about the school already back in 19th century, then school education started to develop. And if you think about what it's now today, and Finnish school system is praised globally, it being a very how good it is. But of course, if you look at recent years, the numbers, so those results, for example, in PISA, so the results have dropped, and there's now a lot of discussion in Finland that why the school results have started to go down and so forth. And if you think public libraries educating and civilizing people, they still play a very important role. This is a picture of the new Central Library in Helsinki, which was opened in 2017, and it's more like a citizen's living room than an ordinary library. And then we will still pack the books in the buses, and we try the books around the country. This picture is taken in Finnish Lapland. There is a small library bus, and if you look, there is a reindeer visiting the library bus. So we provide information everyone who is visiting Finland or residing in Finland. And 2018, when President Putin and Trump held their summit in Helsinki, so the biggest newspaper in Finland, the Helsingin Sanomat, made a huge advertisement campaign, communications campaigns in Helsinki. All the billboards, all the advertisement places where you can put advertisement were covered this kind of headlines. Mr. President, welcome to the land of free press. And they were also written in Russia and also in English, and they had other messages as well. And then talking about legislation and legalism. So when with Finns, we have a very strong sense of rule of law. And when Finland was part of Russia, and I mentioned the Russification program started, so what we Finns did, and we wanted to defend our autonomical status by referring to our legislation. And there is an old picture dating back in 1899 when the Russification project started, and there is the Finnish Maiden of Finland, and then there is the Russian two-headed eagle ripping the law book of that time. But that was already seen at the time that rule of law is very important. And nowadays, if you look, a lot of things has happened. In different global rankings, Finland and other Nordic countries are doing very well. Here are some examples of that. And I think when you are talking about the societal resilience to different kind of threats, whether they are storms, whether they are man-made, whether they are natural disasters, then the more a society feels, or the better a society feels and is, and the more people feel that they have a place in a society, the more the people feel that the society is respecting them, they are treated equally. They believe in trust the democracy, political institution, and other societal institution, the more a resilient society is. And I took this picture in 2 years, almost 2.5 years ago, when the state of emergency was declared for the first time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This was, I think, 16th of March, and the day before the government declared the state of emergency in Finland. And the government recommended people, and authorities recommended people that please stay at home and work remotely if you can do it, so that keep the distance. Social distance is good, and stay at home if you can. It was not a mandate, and the government not dictated people to stay at home, and the police did not chase down people around streets and lock them and keep them out of streets. And instead, there was just recommendations. And the next morning when I went to my workplace, the government palace, the Prime Minister's office, and I started to look around, and this is 8 a.m., about 8 a.m. It should be a busy rush hour time in Helsinki. and the streets were empty. I really felt that I was working in an abandoned city. And then I started to think about that there must be something that, and it goes back to the question of trust. And also during the whole COVID-19 pandemic, even though that in the end, people started to be very tired of restrictions and easing up restrictions, etc. But still, people followed. We didn't have any major protests at all. Disinformation didn't play any kind of role in Finland. So when this vaccination process started, so people were really waiting to get the shots, etc. So we didn't have any problems with that, and people listened what the authorities were saying. People were listening what politicians were saying, and also when the Statistics Finland, which is the statistics authority in Finland, asked the people that where are you getting your information regarding COVID-19 pandemic, and where do you want to get your information? So it was a little bit surprised that if I remember that how many years we've been discussing that how the traditional news media is going to disappear and the social media is going to rule the world. But the first 1, 2, 3 positions in that opinion polls and surveys where people get their information and where they want to get their information was at number 1, television, number 2, newspapers and their online versions, and number 3, radio, number 4, authorities' websites, and then friends, etc. And the social media influencers, etc., they were on the bottom of the list. And that was kind of a relieving thing that people still knew in a crisis situation, for example, that where they find reliable journalistic information. And according to Reuters Institute, year by year, Finns trust the most the traditional news media. Yeah, and I think that's also one of the cornerstones of the resilience of our society. And again, talking about trust, and when we had our parliamentary elections in 2019, then we were thinking about, of course, there was the possibility of election interference, and election interference was kind of a hot topic at the time in different countries. And many countries where they had elections at the time, and of course they took some precautionary measures against possible election interference, and so did we. And then we started to think about that. What's the kind of the most important thing in our elections we need to protect, and that's the trust on our election system. And then we started to think about how should we communicate about to our citizens about the possibility of election interference, that someone wanted to hack our ideas about the reliability of the elections. And then we came the idea that we launched a communications campaign, which was called, as we are very humble Finns, was that Finland has the best elections in the world, and why is that? And the idea was that we've been running more than 110 years reliable elections. We still have the paper, pencil, and the booth, and the election system is very robust. It's old-fashioned, but still it's impossible to hack. You can count every single vote as many times as you want. We store those old ballots, and every single citizen has the right to go and start counting them even 10 years after the elections. So it's impossible to hack, but what someone could try to do is try to hack our impressions or perceptions or ideas about the reliability of the elections. And that was kind of the core idea. And when we are talking about election interference, then we usually tend to think about that it's kind of a social media era phenomenon, but no, it's not. In 1950, when we had presidential election, if you look at the grumpy old man in the left-hand corner, he was president at the time, Juho Kusti Paasikivi. So when he was running for the second term in 1950, so the Soviet Union didn't like him. So they launched a campaign against Paasikivi, but they failed. Paasikivi got re-elected, and he served as the president until the 1956. Of course, the information environment was totally different, and the media were different, but still there is nothing new with these kind of issues. And when Russia launched its attack on Ukraine in February, and when the discussion started in Finland that should Finland apply for a NATO membership together with Sweden, then suddenly we saw a huge international media interest in Finland. And I don't know how many news media outlets visited Finland and visited our civil shelters, etc. And then I think many of the news stories were focusing on how prepared Finnish society is, and there are a lot of historical reasons. Those film TV crews visited the shelters in our bedrock under Helsinki, etc. And if you think about why I say that preparedness is our DNA, this is the church, Agricola Church. It's a very big church right into downtown Helsinki. It was built already in 1930s, and it represents functionalistic style architecture. But when the church was designed in 1930s, so if you look at the tower and the spire, so it's 103 meters tall, and or 350 feet high. In a good weather, you can see the tower in Tallinn, in Estonia, across the Gulf of Finland. The distance is 80 kilometers. And when the church was designed, so it was estimated and calculated that if a war comes, then the enemy bombers, fighter aircraft, use that tower as a navigational aid. So what the architects and designers did, there is a mechanism that you can retractable the tower down. And when the Second World War started in 1939, when the Winter War started, and when it became obvious that Russia is going to attack, the Soviet Union is going to attack Finland, so the tower was lowered down. And when the war was over in 1945, so I think it was 1946 when they raised up again the tower. And now I have visited a couple of embassies there, which are around the church, and I have always told this story to those embassy counselors that if you look outside the window and look at the church, and if you are talking about preparedness, there is a church which was built in 1930s, and the architects and designers already thought about the possibility that someone is going to attack Finland. We should be prepared. And here are some headlines of the news stories we saw. There were stories about bunkers under Helsinki and under bunkers around the country, etc. And even though when the Cold War was over, so in many countries, there were these stories and that how the war is over and there will never be new wars in Europe, and countries started to do minimizing their armies, etc. But we Finns, we didn't. Instead of Finns, we will still continue to develop our civil defenses and our military defenses. Government modernized our army, etc. Civil crisis management was developed further. We still maintained a stockpiles full of food or petrol, medicines, etc. And I can say that someone even laughed at us that you are old school and why you are still storing rubber boots in bunkers, etc. No one needs those things anymore. But no, if you look at the time, then I think that we were right. There's a picture, and in peacetime, those shelters are used for example, cafes, cultural centers. There are even swimming pool in one of them, parking spaces, storage spaces. But in a crisis situation, all those places can be converted in a couple of days as a shelter to protect people. And then Finland is well prepared for a crisis. There are stockpiles, and we have maintained those stockpiles. We had those already the Cold War era and also afterwards, and still. So you can say that the Finnish society is very well prepared for different kind of crisis. It's not only war, but it's also different other hybrid attacks or other kind of natural disasters, etc. And as our president said in February that, and he has also, I think, said many times that the most important defense line goes between the ears of everything. And if you looked at how the heroic fight Ukrainians doing, it's the willingness of defend the country. So, and it's the same story we had in 1939 in Winter War when Soviet Union attacked. The willingness to defend, even though that the army was poorly equipped, and undermanned, but still, then that's a strength. And this is already old news story. And CNN visited us many in 2019, and I was one of the experts interviewed in this news story. And I think if you look at the headline, so I must admit that I don't agree. Of course, I would wish that there would be time that we would say that, okay, the war against fake news is over, and there will be no fake news anymore in the future, but that's unfortunately not the case. So that no one can say that there is a kind of date when this, even if you use the war-like terminology, that the war is over. We had this kind of cases 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. We will have it tomorrow, 10 years of time, and 100 years of time. This is kind of ongoing story. So that's why we need to be prepared, and we need always to understand the world we are living in. It's kind of a civic skill, understanding what disinformation is, what cyber attacks are, etc. It's a civic skill. In order to you can do your daily businesses and be an active citizen. You need to understand all those forces and all those things which are impacting on your daily life. And as I said, that there's been several new headlines and about how resilient the Finnish society is, and it goes back to the very basic nature of our society and the level of education and also the trust. And as I showed you, there are, according to different rankings, so then Finland is one of the least corrupted nations in the world, and people really trust the authorities. If I remember right, there was one opinion poll recently, so close to 90% of Finns say that they trust, for example, the Finnish law enforcement, the Finnish police, and the defense forces, and other authorities. So it's a great thing. And Guardian wrote an article, and as I mentioned already, media education, teaching critical thinking, it already starts at kindergarten, and it's a lifelong journey. And as we always have said, that I think the first line of defense and our real life heroes are the teachers, and also the news media, journalists who are doing critical news stories and etc. And here's the second one. And BBC was here in Helsinki in spring. This is an older picture, and it's a little bit taken from a bad angle, but this is the Citizen Square in downtown Helsinki. And the BBC journalist interviewed me. If you look at the right-hand corner, there is the yellow building, which is the new central library, Oodi, I already discussed. And we had an interview there. And then the journalist asked me about what does a resilient society needs. And I said to him that just look outside the window. There are all the elements that society needs. There is on the left-hand corner, you can see the massive building with pillars. That's the democracy, that's the parliament. The green building in the middle, that's the music center of Helsinki, it's culture. And you can see tiny little spire above the green building, that's a national museum. Then there is the Museum of Contemporary Art on the left-hand side. Then there is the several news media outlets, their offices newsrooms are around the square. So it's and if you think the square itself, it's citizens' living room. It's a common place where people come together. They have festivity. We have festivities there, and people spend times and etc. So, and in fact, if about 1 kilometer from there is the district court of Helsinki, so kind of representing the rule of law. So there is the culture, there is the history, there is the education, civilization, there's the democracy, rule of law, media. So it's a common space for ordinary citizens, common for everyone. And if you look at the central library, it's more of kind of citizens' living room, common joint place, open for everyone, and that's the thing you need. And then one thing is the concept of comprehensive security, and that's the last issue I would like to talk to you. Then the concept of comprehensive security started to develop from our experiences from the Second World War. As a small nation, we need to collaborate in order to survive. And we have developed the concept since the Second World War. It's not only for our managing a military crisis, but it's also managing everyday crises, whether they are traffic jams, whether they are, for example, accidents in a power plant, for example, or whether they are natural disasters, storms, etc., etc. And today, if you look at this different kind of threats we are facing and societies are facing, so they are targeting. If you think of, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, it targeted the whole society. So that's why a 360-degree approach is needed in order to manage different kind of crises and societies to be prepared. So we have defined 7 vital functions for society we need to take care of in all circumstances. And you can see that there's psychological resilience, there are internal security, defense capability, etc. And if you look the blue lines between all the corners of the diamond, I would say that it's the trust, and that's the trust again keeps the society together, and it's a kind of the basement or the cornerstone of a resilient society, and it's done by collaborating in Finland. Security belongs to everyone. All the vital functions are secured through collaboration between ordinary citizens, authorities, NGOs, and business community. And this is kind of a government resolution, the security strategy for society, which lays the foundations for this concept of comprehensive security concept. And this means also that, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we started to collaborate with the social media influencers. And we collaborated in communications with NGOs, for example. And then we have a security committee where our authorities are sitting around the same table, but there are also NGOs are sitting around the same table, meeting regularly to discuss nationwide preparedness relating issues and so forth. And when we are talking about countering malign information influence activities, I'm not talking about the schools, and I'm not talking about media literacy, media education. Instead, I'm talking about what we did at Prime Ministers of with other agencies. And in 2014, when after the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia, and when we started to see campaigns, disinformation campaigns targeting Finland, other Western countries, so we thought that we need to do something in a more coordinated manner. And then it was already clear that the model we are going to adopt and follow is the concept of comprehensive security, that we need to collaborate. We need to forget those silos between administrative branches, that as a small nation, silos are a very expensive hobby. We cannot afford it again. So we need to collaborate. We need to collaborate with universities. We need to collaborate with business communities, etc., and so forth. And then we started we do our part to raise ordinary citizens' awareness. And again, the most important part, and again, are schools and news media by doing their everyday job. And then, of course, we started updating our guidelines and develop collaboration also not only inside Finland, but also between different countries, European Union, etc. And then one thing was that we started to support our stakeholders. I don't know how me and my colleagues that how many lectures, briefings we have given during the past years. And we have, and in Finnish news media, they have invited us, almost all of the major players in that field, to visit them and to brief the journalists about what Stratcom and what information influence is all about. And again, that when we visited the newsrooms, we always reminded that when we are entering the news media newsroom, that we are not there to tell the journalists that what kind of sources they should use, etc. No, there is a thick firewall between government and independent news media. News media is news media, and government is government. There is both have own role in society, and we fully respect the integrity of news media and journalists. But that was also an example that in a small nation, a small country like Finland, and then for us it's easy to collaborate, even though that one is representing news media and one is representing government or business community, etc. And so it's kind of everyday business here in Finland. And then again, talking about collaboration, then and safeguarding the vital functions of our society. And the business community is also doing collaboration with authorities, and they are using, even though that they are competitors, they are collaborating when we are talking about security and preparedness. And if you look at the picture, then there are sectors in our society. There's the food supply, energy, transport and logistics, health, finance, industry, and other, and there is the media, for example. So there are pools, and which are run by business community. And it's kind of a collaborative platform where, for example, the media pool, where I'm member, I'm representing the National Cybersecurity Center and the Finnish Transport and Communications Agency there. We are meeting with the chief editors quite regularly and discuss about preparedness and security related issues. We are absolutely not discussing anything about the contents, absolutely not. But then if we can share, if we see that there are new kind of threat scenarios or threat models we are seeing here in Finland, then we can share this kind of information. And also finance sector is doing exactly the same, and chemical and also defense sector are doing exactly the same, or retail and distribution sector are doing, even though that those business, the companies are competitors. Then when we are talking about security and preparedness, then we can sit us around the same table and discuss and share information and share our experiences. And this whole model supports our society's preparedness related issues. And also when we are talking about disinformation, etc. So they are disinformation, or in general talking information influence or malign information influence activities. They are talking in every single sector of our society. So we have these sectors have and pools have organized exercises, preparedness exercises, and authorities have participated in those exercises. But again, this kind of for me it represents the kind of the idea of comprehensive security and the importance of collaboration in dealing with the modern threats we are facing today, and we are going to face also tomorrow. I'm a very shy Finnish civil servant. I'm in my previous position at the Prime Minister's office, I was a teacher at the National Defense, communications teacher at the National Defense courses, and I think one of the best course feedback I received was that there is an unbelievable civil servant who can, when he's talking, he inhales and exhales simultaneously, so no breaks at all. But it's now better that if I just shut my mouth and give the floor to others. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Jussi. That was, you combined two very strong elements there. One was comprehension, the other was engagement, which is absolutely brilliant. As a facilitator myself, a presenter, lessons for me there. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Interestingly, of course, as is always the case in any discussion of the Nordic countries, trust, collaboration, public spaces, education comes through very, very strongly. But I think I will remember your talk most for the retractable church tower. And also I like the fact that you talked about collaboration, be more serious, your collaboration with social media influencers. I thought that's an interesting sort of approach, intelligent sort of approach, as opposed to sort of a conflicting one.
There is one thing I would like to mention regarding the social media companies. Of course, we have been discussing many years about the problems in their business models. And for us, as for a small nation, and there are just 5.5 million Finnish speakers, and all the other small Nordic countries and Baltic states, we have the same problem. for example, when those tech giants, Meta and others, are developing their tools to or the platforms to and algorithms and AIs to detect, for example, disinformation and hate speech, and what they do first, that they teach those AIs first in English language or French or other major languages, and then Estonians, we have 1.5 million people. We have 5.6 million people. Danes have about the same in Denmark level living. So then I'm personally really frustrated with these companies that usually they tend to appear before the elections, and then they have beautiful PowerPoint presentations, and they tell beautiful, nice stories about how they are protecting the elections and blah, blah, blah. But then the reality is totally different. That I don't know how many times, for example, Facebook has apologized during the past years. So, and for us, the European Union is the right context to deal with these issues. And finally, the European Union took action. So the new legislation, the DSA and DMA, finally came into force. So that as ordinary citizens, we have more rights to know how these companies are using our personal information and data. And also, they are obliged to open up the logic behind the algorithms, so they're more transparency and they are more accountable for us. So it's a good step. But for a small nation, we have had problems with those companies for earlier. But as I said, that we are a member of the European Union, so it's a big benefit for us.
Thank you, Jussi, for that. And that is a beautiful segue, in fact, to our Scottish responders. So on the issue of Brexit and the EU, I know Chris is perhaps going to touch on that in his response. And then I saw Claire from the government nodding along as well. So lots to talk about there in terms of the social media companies as well. Chris, would you like to talk for 5-10 minutes in response to Jussi's presentation from a Scottish perspective? Over to you.
Yes, I mean, great presentation and lots of really striking points to pick up on. I will probably leave Claire to talk more about some of the policy detail and so on, but I think I'll talk more generally about some of these issues and how they impact in different societies. I think there's two general things I would say as somebody who studies communication, media and journalism that are really, really striking about the similarities. The first is a question, there are two tensions, I think, overall in media, communications and journalism. The first one, I would say, is this age-old question of, is communication somehow inherently virtuous and good? And this is something which goes with everybody, I expect, will have heard of Marshall McLuhan and all those arguments. But it's one of these questions which always returns whenever you're thinking about media and communications. You're always thinking about this question of narratives which tend to position the idea of connectivity and communications as inherent public goods and more nuanced approaches. Now, I would say that the difference in a Scottish, UK, Anglosphere context is that I think we still have attitudes which were kind of set out in the 90s and round about the millennium, the time, of course, of the great .com bubble. And those attitudes very much informed a kind of utopian thinking about communications and your communications technology and the communications economy, and this is all going to lead to these kind of sunny uplands in the new century. And I think that it's really interesting that Jussi was pointing out, 2009 is this year where things began to change. I think one of the problems that we have in Scotland and the UK is that change has been very slow because we have a media system which is essentially very light touch self-regulation from the media, and is still essentially informed by those kind of values which are, involve a kind of utopian Silicon Valley narrative that the communication is almost like the perfect commodity, but also something that promotes inherent social goods. And of course, the example of disinformation and all the various problems that we've seen is a very good demonstration of the fact that increasing communications capacity and increasing communications technology comes with big trade-offs, as any new technology does. And I would say as well, I think when it comes to, I'd be very interested to, I think about some of the very controversial issues or the kind of culture wars that have emerged in the Anglosphere, and to have a Finnish perspective on that. Obviously, we can think of Brexit, we can think of culture wars around gender identity and sexuality, which perhaps in Scotland have been particularly amplified because we have a media system, we have a Scottish Parliament, but we don't really have a fully fledged media system and a wider sense of an informed society, which I thought was so well demonstrated by that picture of the square with a Parliament building facing the public library. So, I mean, at the moment we have a Royal Palace opposite the Scottish Parliament building. So my big suggestion from this meeting is that we turn Holyrood House, the Royal Palace in Edinburgh, into a public library. Hopefully we'll get the government behind that soon. But I would also say, obviously, the other tension that you often see within communications, and the point about Facebook there is obviously very crucial. But you tend to see a swing between the idea that communications is that media and journalism are and digital platforms are moving us towards this global village, these international platforms, where we will all gradually, where the nation state will eventually kind of ebb away or become a remnant of what it has been and what it is today. But in actual fact, I think you are seeing a trend. There's a scholar at Loughborough University whose name escapes me at the moment, but she writes, and she's writing and thinking a lot about the idea that we're actually swinging back to a situation where we have platform nations, which refers to the fact that there is this new, not just at the EU level, but also at national levels across the world as well. There is this, increasing concern and agenda around how you work with big tech or regulate big tech in order to create safe national spaces. And obviously that with Facebook, the example that we all know of as the most extreme example of that is the situation with the Rohingya in Myanmar, where they were found to be, these are organizations which their attitudes to social responsibility are very questionable, to put it mildly, and there is also just the simple matter of that their model is that they do not employ that many people in relation to the value that they generate in the global economy. And I think there probably is a need to start to tackle that. One of the things I would say in relation, again, going back to this idea of what we could do in Scotland with to learn some of these lessons from Finland. I'm really struck by that. I'm interested in journalism, and I think we often focus too much on journalism. I think there is a wider knowledge base that is required in society, which is about things like education and libraries. And I think the governments have not been very good in the UK and in Scotland about connecting these things. We think of journalism and we think of media as something which is not, which is, you should predominantly be deregulated or self-regulated. And basically, and the essential essence of communications policy in the UK is to create large conglomerates. And we know that the creation of those conglomerates and this, the centralization that occurs and the lack of control that then is established at a local level, we know that that has been disastrous for the provision of journalism in Scotland. And one of the things that I think would be interesting, I'll maybe just leave this here as a little thought on what we could perhaps practically do. There is, at the moment, there are 675 students enrolled in journalism courses at undergraduate level in Scottish universities. So it's very difficult to establish how many journalists there actually are working in Scotland. Anybody who has worked as a journalist in Scotland will tell you that creating around 700 new journalists every year in Scotland, but is creating too many in terms of the number of journalistic jobs that there are. NewsQuest, for example, the owners of the Herald and various other newspapers, at a UK level, NewsQuest employs 571 journalists across the UK, and it's various different titles. So if you think about it, if you think about that, anomaly that we're training up around about 700 journalists, and the UK-wide news organisations are only employing about 500 or 600. There is this interesting question, I think, of what might we do with all of these people who are presumably receiving, excellent media education, learning all of these skills, learning about, a really interesting, cutting-edge, changing part of the economy. And I think that one of the ways we can maybe think about it is, well, actually, what if we thought of those people who are trained to be journalists now as people who are actually, in 5 or 10 years' time, going to be adopting some kind of role in society which is somewhere in between a journalist, and a librarian and a teacher. And the idea that perhaps we will learn as a society in the way that Finland is kind of showing us, to link up all of these things in terms of the way we think about these traditional roles, and breaking down those traditional roles and thinking, actually, what we need is an informed society. And we certainly have bright enough people. The problem is that the institutions in Scotland that traditionally provided that are in a bad way and are in decline. So I suppose I would, my two responses would be absolutely, let's get that library opposite the Parliament, and also let's think about a slightly more diverse and imaginative role, and a wider role that all of these people that we're training as journalists could play in terms of achieving some of these aims. So I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Thanks you so much, Chris. Well done for powering through. I know you've got a cold, so that was excellently well done. I love the idea of turning Holyrood into a public library. I also love your idea of looking at that principle of collaboration, but looking at it from a sort of a bottom-up almost sort of perspective. This idea of breaking down those sort of professional boundaries between librarians, journalists, and teachers. Really interesting stuff. Thank you so much for that. Some interesting questions about the EU as well. Claire, I could see you nodding throughout a lot of that as well. I did say I'd give you the floor for a little comment from the Scottish Government's perspective. So do you want to just take a couple of minutes and sort of give your perspective, and then to everyone else, I've got some questions coming through. But please do keep your questions coming. And for those of you who are watching on other platforms than Zoom, please remember you can send your questions and comments to Nordic Horizons at hotmail.co.uk and on Twitter at Nordic Horizons. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks very much, Dan. And Jussi, huja ilta? Huja ilta? That's good evening in Finnish. Thank you so much for the invite. I mean, the invite came in literally a few hours ago, and so I'm kind of winging it a wee bit. But I'm actually, it's so fortuitous because today I've just returned from a huge cyber summit in Edinburgh, where we actually had the ambassador from the Estonian government talking, as well as our own politicians and members of the FBI. And what was coming out very strongly was this whole concept of trust, and how people trust the messages that come, and which messages do they trust in terms of cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And just to introduce myself before I start on that, I'm the head of the Cyber Resilience Unit in the Scottish Government. And my role really is to ensure that we implement our national strategy in cyber resilience. And I work with partners across all the different sectors to make that happen, working with third, public, private sectors and into communities. The Cabinet Secretary who's responsible for that is Mr. Brown, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Veterans, as well as obviously all ministers are very interested in this subject. But going back to today, the Estonian ambassador was saying that they work very closely with Finland, and they seem to present a similar kind of approach in terms of public trust in government. And you know, I sometimes wonder if that's because of the kind of the relatively young age of Estonia, that you can probably embed lots of kind of new ways of working. If you become a digital, from the outset, you become a digitally advanced nation. And the challenge here, I think, in Scotland is that, you know, on a personal level, this is my viewpoint, not government's, is that I think intrinsically Scottish people, you know, worry about being online and, you know, doing their kind of their business online in terms of paying bills online and so on. And so there's a huge barrier, I think, that we still need to cross with that. But I think things are moving on. So in the UK, we have the National Cyber Security Centre, which is the authoritative source for trusted advice and guidance in terms of what to do to kind of prevent a cyber incident happening, or what to do if something happens, and, you know, how to get help. And I think over the past few years, we're starting to get the messaging out there, but I think the challenge is that people know when they're online that there's a risk of being online, and they're kind of aware that if they click on links or whatever, that might lead to something quite unfortunate for them. But knowing about the risk doesn't seem to change people's behaviours, which is a really strange place to be at. And what the National Cyber Security Centre says, they say that, you know, if you do 3 or 4 simple things, that can really prevent about 80 to 90% of all cyber incidents happening. So it's things like using a strong password, using 3 random words, turning on 2-step verification, updating your devices, backing them up. You know, really quite simple steps for everybody. But how do we get our population, to our citizens, to do that? And I guess that's one of my questions for you, Jussi, is that just intrinsic? Is that just inherent in the Finnish mentality that you would, you know, be doing these kind of preventative actions, just like we, you know, put on our seatbelt automatically? How do we get to the point where people think before they click on phishing emails? And that's, I think it's a really worry, you know, we're in a worrying kind of position at the moment where people in businesses and large organisations and governments staff are still clicking on these links, which could lead to terrible consequences for that organisation or that individual or family or community. So there's something there that I would be dead interested to have further talks with you see on that. I mean, collaboration is really, I think, one of the strongest points in Scotland. You know, we're someone called we're a Goldilocks nation, where we're not too big and we're not too small, we're just right in terms of size. So it's very easy to bring together the right people very quickly. And in Scotland, in terms of cyber resilience, and it's not cyber security, because cyber security is a reserved matter for the UK government. Cyber resilience, which is about kind of preventative work, we have a Cyber Scotland partnership, which has all the key players and partners from education, health, business, private sector, third sector, who come together, and we plan ahead on what are the kind of key awareness raising messages that need to go out to different communities across Scotland and tailoring them according to that community. So that's going well. It's in its infancy, but I think it's a positive step forward. And there's a real appetite for people to work together in Scotland as well. So I think I just really wanted to say that. But the other thing that just struck me, Chris, was when you were talking about the 675 students, the journalist students. I mean, this work can't be done by government alone, or indeed the national agencies working together. It's actually kind of grassroots organisations, communities that can really make the difference. And we were talking today about, well, what if there had, I mean, the biggest worry really, and probably for every country, is that if there were multiple cyber incidents of a country, would you be able to handle and manage them? I mean, there was the SEPA incident, which was the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency incident that happened 2 Christmases ago. Now, you know, the reality is, if there had been multiple concurrent incidences at that time, Scotland would have really struggled to manage them and get the organisations back up and running. And thankfully, it was only one big incident that happened. But even now, that organisation is still reeling from, you know, the kind of catastrophic events that happened. So we were thinking today about, you know, how can we brigade people to be part of the defence of the country? You know, and we were talking about, you know, perhaps during incidents we could have almost cyber support people, cyber resilience volunteers. And then when you talked about the journalists, I was thinking, well, maybe there's an opportunity there for us to be using journalists in terms of that preventative messaging work. And that, you know, the work in terms of social media and so on. We've done quite a few bits of work with the likes of Young Scots in terms of, you know, social media and prevention work. But, you know, here we've got professionals who potentially could be a fantastic resource to support this work. So I'll stop there. I mean, I could go on forever. I mean, that's only a tiny wee part of my job, but thank you very much for the opportunity to say something. Thank you.
No, thank you, Claire. That's really practical, useful stuff. And just before I bring other questions in, I think that's a good point to bring Jussi back in on that point. I will say, Neil, Rob has just posted a comment in Zoom saying someone could write a cyber book for kids that will trickle to adults and everyone else. And I bet you see that there's some great books in Finland along those lines. But perhaps you might want to answer some of Claire's questions and points there, and then I'll bring other questioners in. Thank you.
Just a quickie, Dan.
Oh, sorry, Claire.
Rob, Neil. We have just commissioned a book for P1s and P2s for the early concepts of cybersecurity, believe it or not, and it's through rhyme and visuals, and it's been tested just now in schools. So watch this space. I'll send you a link, Dan, that maybe can go out to folk afterwards.
Great, thanks, Jussi.
Yes, unfortunately, I have to say that people are still also clicking links they should not do here in Finland, even though that there have been campaigns, and also they have been reminded at schools and workplaces not to do that kind of thing. And I think sometimes it's that even though that people know that there is a risk, then it might be a bad moment, or they just don't care. They think that, for example, when we're talking about cyber risk or cyber threats, that it's not my problem, or it won't target me, so I can click links, as many links I want. And regarding social media, before the pandemic, I used to travel quite a lot around the country to give lectures and presentation about disinformation, etc. And usually when I entered the auditorium, if there was 100 people listening, or there were 100 attendees in the place, my first question was always that raise your hand if you have a profile in one or several social media platforms. And usually from the 100 people, 90 people raised their hands and they were happy and smiling and waving their hands. Yes, I have Facebook profile or on WhatsApp, etc. But then when I asked my second question that, okay, how many of you read the terms of use so that you know how those platforms are using your information and how you are committed, then of those 90 people, usually 1 or 2 hands remained up. And even I saw the one miracle that there was just one hand and it disappeared very rapidly. And because I think that the person didn't want to cause any fuss about that he was the only one. But the problem is that even though that we are communicating and reminding people that sometimes there are different kind of reasons that people don't follow recommendations. And of course, I'm working at the National Cybersecurity Center. So in Finland, we have also a long history in collaborating with different stakeholders in strengthening up the our society's cyber resilience. And for example, NGOs again are doing very important job. For example, one of the biggest NGOs in Finland called Marta, they have called Cyber Martas, and it's their target audience is elderly people, and they are visiting elderly homes and teaching the residents how to use smartphones and tablets, etc. So even though that and public libraries are also offering that kind of services, and they have public libraries are also providing help desk services. That if you have problems with your computer, you can take it to the public library, and then they will fix it up. Or if you have problems with applications, you have download it to your mobile phone, for example, then you can go there and yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Jussi. I'm going to take some questions and points from the chat now. So Mark's, first of all, I should say, for anyone who is listening on the podcast after the event tonight, should highlight that Leslie made a film with Charlie Stewart, Estonia, the Baltic Tiger, and it explains the country's digital revolution since 1991 in great detail, and that's available through Leslie's website. But I'm going to go to a comment now from Mark. Yeah, Mark Stevenson. It says, "Hi, Jussi. Is the primary source of fake news from other nation states or internal Finnish news organizations?"
I want to talk about news organization instead. That of course, like in cyber, if you're talking about actors in info side, so then it's difficult to say that who is behind every single tweet, really. So I think mainly during the past years, I think the main actors have been domestic ones. They've been individuals or groups of individuals who have coordinated their activities, etc. And as I said, that as in the cyber world, that it's difficult to say that who is behind every single tweet or activity or every posting. So that's why we have always reminded that more important than to trying to figure out who is behind every single act is to understand the target audience, the message, the narrative, and the aims the actor is trying to reach. And then our duty is to, or the task is to trying to reach out the same audience and deliver our message to them as wide as possible. But of course, we have state actors like Russia, as I mentioned already in 2014. And even though we already had before that, there were in Kremlin media news stories about how Finnish social workers are hunting Russian-born children and taking them into custody without any valid reasons, etc. So and one should not travel to Finland because you just raise your voice and then the Finnish social worker comes and takes it, and that was a lie. That was a lie, but yeah.
Thanks, Jussi. We've had a question on Twitter from someone on one of the other platforms saying, how has NATO membership application affected the Finnish approach? I guess that's around sort of media approaches and media literacy. Has the application for NATO membership affected Finland's approach in terms of its cybersecurity and media literacy?
Of course, the NATO membership will change things, and I think that's a question you should address to other experts. I've been not dealing with the NATO issues at all.
I'd imagine there's been a heightened interest in media and fake news and sort of propaganda as a result of the NATO membership. Though I guess the point here is that the approach taken in Finland is very, very timious for this, and another example of good preparation. Here's a question from Leslie. Leslie, do you want to unmute and ask your question about public ownership?
Yeah. Well, as ever, I'm sitting having lots of questions, actually. I mean, I was just wondering on that last one, Jussi, perhaps the point about NATO was more that Putin did warn that if Sweden and Finland dared to move towards NATO membership, there would be repercussions. There would be a reaction. So,
yes, and of
course, there hasn't been a reaction in terms of them coming across the border. So one wonders if it's a different kind of reaction.
Of course, they have said it many times, and Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Russia, has warned us many times, and Medvedev also, the former prime minister, and our National Intelligence Service warned and reminded people that when the NATO process started in spring, so that we should be prepared for possible cyber attacks, or we should be prepared for possible disinformation campaigns targeting at Finland. But so far, I must say that there's been quite calm, so that we haven't seen any major incidents. Of course, there's all the time happening DDoS attacks, for example, etc. But so far, it's been very I wouldn't say very calm, but calm. And so that we have, that's a question we have been asked many times, that have you seen any major issues, etc. But so far, but of course we are prepared. The companies are prepared, and I will refer to our long history of collaboration and preparedness, and also it also includes cyber, so that we, and our colleagues have said also publicly that all those cases we have seen in Ukraine, so that we have already prepared for possibility that we would face similar cyber attack, for example. So there hasn't been any new things for us. But of course, we should not close our eyes and think about that nothing would happen, because of course you never know what tomorrow brings to table. So that's why it's important. And I must again give my credits to Finnish news media, as they are making news stories all the time and asking us the questions, and also that's the way informing people that they are more aware of that kind of things. And of course, one thing we have been reminding, or authorities have been reminded, is kind of this 72 hours pack every single Finn should have. So you should have a radio with batteries, and you should have drinking water for 72 hours, and you should always carry cash. And it's not relating to these security issues, but it's a long history with these 72 hours campaigns. I think that it was first published back in 1980s, that you should survive 72 hours without electricity, without any functional credit cards, etc. And it's not only for warlike situations or cyber attacks. It says there could be for example, a storm which causes disruptions in power supply, for example. So no state actors, instead natural forces are behind it. So then you need to manage to survive. And 72 hours. I remember that our French colleagues said that why you have 72 hours. I think they had a longer or less time, but 72 hours is kind of old concept for us.
Thanks, Jussi. And Leslie, do you want to come back? Yeah, do you want to come back with your public ownership question?
Indeed. In fact, although I was sort of again meandering around this a bit, just because I am a journalist, and I was listening to what Chris said and what you were saying. And I mean, the thing in Britain particularly is that opinion sells newspapers. It's not facts, it's opinion. You know, when I was a member of the Scottish Prisons Commission, and we came to Finland in 2008 or 7 and went to visit Suomenlinna, which is also Finland's #1 tourist attraction. It's a little island off Helsinki. And we're astonished to discover later that it's also an open prison. And when this was being described to us, that the municipality of 450 people on Suomenlinna, honestly, everybody's minds are blowing at this point, the idea that there could be a little council that small. But anyway, that they had decided that they voted to have an open prison because it would give lots of advantages to them, because the people who go to that open prison either are specialists in working with stone, or they become specialists and they actually keep that island afloat. It's such a perfectly rational thing to do. And all of us who were there said this would never happen in Scotland or Britain, because the media would just be all over it, turning it into a thugs island, and, you know, all sorts of sensationalism would be working at the base of it. And it struck me then, and for the times that I've been in Finland, that you, for whatever reason, you have far less sensationalism in your media generally.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Why is that? Are you not sensational people?
I'm not specialist in media, but I think it's there would be better experts to analyze Finnish media, but then I think it has never been that way. So that of course there is sensational stories now and then, but still, and if I remember the news coverage during the COVID-19 pandemic, so I can't remember that there would have been any major sensationalism. I mean, it was more on kind of fact-based kind of. I mean, this is totally wrong wording from me, but there was no such kind of thing, sensationalism at all, in my opinion. Of course, there's some few news stories now and then, but mainly it was more kind of that journalists ask tough questions from the politicians and from the National Health Institute, that why this and this is going to happen, and why we're taking this kind of restrictions into the table, but not kind of making fuss that people are dying in masses, or etc., or kind of throwing gloomy pictures. Instead, that it was kind of objective report. That's also a stupid word, but if I look back the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, so I have high respect on Finnish journalists. And of course, when I follow the press conferences of the government and listen to the tough questions and how the journalists challenge the politicians and decision makers, so they did a great job, in my opinion. They do. I think they also did an important job in answering people's questions. And if the politicians didn't answer the questions, and the citizens needed information, then the journalists asked the tough questions, and the politicians and health authorities had to answer that kind of thing. That I think we haven't had that kind of traditional history in Finland, kind of sensationalism. Of course, we have tabloids, yellow paper, etc. But still, and of course, there's been sometimes discussion about what was particular news story. Was it too much sensational, etc. But then there is one thing, that there is a media self-regulation, which is a very old institution in Finland. So that media is self-regulating. They have a journalistic guidelines or rules that they are following. And if someone wants to complain, then the mass media council then evaluate and estimates whether there's been a breach against these journalistic rules. Or principles, etc. So media self-regulation has a long history in Finland. I think also that's one thing why people still believe in media, and it's highly a highly distinguished institution, in fact.
But what happens if there was, for example, if there was a lot of conspiracy theories about COVID, about vaccines running on social media, on Facebook, on these sorts of things, because that's not so easily controlled. And actually, sometimes the media, the sort of proper media, if you like, end up picking up stories, you know, from social media. If they see a big conspiracy theory running, they think, "Ooh, we better get in on that," and suddenly it's on the front page of a tabloid here.
No, I must say that we didn't have that. I'm talking from the government communicators' perspective, and I must say that I don't think that we had that kind of problem. I would rather say that instead of picking up conspiracy theories and start publishing them, then the media started to challenge those narratives, and they opposed those narratives, and they also brought up that don't be deceived, that they're on social media, there are this and this kind of claims that which are not true. So I think, and disinfo, as I mentioned, that disinformation has so far been very marginal problem in Finland. There are of course very marginal groups who are living in their own bubbles, but their messages, they have not resonated in wider public. So there, of course, we had those anti-vaxxers, and there's been conspiracy theories about how COVID-19 is a hoax. But again, it was a very marginal group, so that it didn't shake the boat at all. People wanted to get the vaccination, and they followed the government recommendations, etc. And it even seemed that if someone tried to launch kind of a disinformation campaign and spreading lies about COVID-19, then it backfired. People started to defending the scientific information and starting putting those persons who tried to spread those disinformation in the corner. So kind of the civic society also defended, and also a few journalists, they didn't pick up any major stories or conspiracy theories. Instead, that they challenged those persons who tried to spread those lies. And as I said that earlier, as we have many times said, that our real life heroes in this are the kindergarten teachers and the Finnish news media, who are doing a great job in defending the society in this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jussi. Folks, I think you might have witnessed the the idea for another event on regulation, etc., of the media in the Nordic countries. There are a couple of comments that have come in relevant to this conversation. You want facts, not entertainment, says Neil. And someone else has come back to say, yes, Mark again saying, we have media organizations that are overtly aligned to political ideologies and are comfortable publishing misinformation and in some cases disinformation as well. I'm just checking to see if any other comments or questions have come in. I'm conscious of time, and of course it is 2 hours later in Finland, and we've kept Jussi for a good wee while. But any last comments or questions before I let Leslie back on her comment or question about public ownership? Leslie, do you want to come back on that one while we're waiting?
I wondered if Chris wanted to say anything, you know, because there's been an awful lot said there, and he's been just sitting manfully listening to it all.
Yeah, I suppose one of the to be a little bit skeptical about this is of course, you know, to step back, you want to be able to say, well, actually, you know, I think definitely, in, you know, from a Anglosphere perspective, we would say, hold on a minute, a government communications official saying it's great that the media are working so well for the nation, and it's, you know, fitting in with the civil service and the teachers and so on, and that obviously, you know, we can understand the different cultural context there, but I suppose that it's to do with this question of institutions, and I think this idea that, I mean, my PhD is on an institution which has kind of, you know, fallen on hard times, let's say, and I think there is definitely I think that where you have a healthy ecology of institutions that are interacting with each other, then that creates a very stable system. But when one starts to erode, then that has impacts on others. And I think that one of the problems that we have in the UK, which becomes more and more problematic as the years go on, is that we have some stable social democratic institutions like the National Health Service. Then we have other institutions like the media and the press who often actively work to undermine those institutions and are kind of defined often by a mission to undermine those institutions and to destabilize them, because we have a society which is very unequal, and we also have a society where the press has essentially a kind of works not on a liberal model, but almost more a kind of libertarian model. You know, if you own a newspaper, you should be able to essentially do whatever you want with it within very, very broad parameters. So I think one of the things that's really key is this idea that all of these different institutions, including education, media, health service aspects of the state, their health is always interrelated. And I think that in terms of making arguments about how we might reform the media in this country, I think we could be a lot better at making those arguments. Because if one plank falls, then the others are always less stable.
Thanks very much, Chris. Yep, absolutely. Leslie, does that answer your point? Do you see anything you want to come in on Chris's comments there? I'm going to bring Claire in for another chance in a second as well.
Well, the thing I was going to ask was, in that slide where you had a list of all the different kind of parts of society, essentially from the health service right the way through, I did wonder whether having a lot of assets in public ownership and even cooperative ownership in Finland makes it sort of easier for everyone to have a kind of civic outlook. Because, I mean, I'm old enough to remember before Margaret Thatcher in Britain, when everything was in public ownership, British Rail, British Gas, all of these things, all these utilities were seen as public goods, and they were, okay, they're not brilliantly managed many times, but nonetheless, they seem to be part of a public civic world and with institutions, just as Chris was describing. And I mean, what's really struck me is how different, you know, we've become, in the sense that so many things are privatized, happily in Scotland, far less than there is in England. But still, I wonder how that interferes in a way with, obviously you've got private actors on board. You said that in the slide that you showed, but you're still dealing by and large with public actors.
Those are in those slides. So big part of the services or critical infrastructure is run by the private companies here in Finland. So some of them are of course partly owned by the government or the state, and all fully owned by the state, but major part of those companies are private companies. They are listed in Helsinki Stock Exchange, for example, or Nasdaq, etc. So they are not only, I think most of them are fully private companies. That's, I think, quite unique in Finland, that even though that they are competitors with each other, and they don't have any relation to government, but they are producing important services in our society, or keeping up critical infrastructure up, for example. So then they are kind of committed to the common good in protecting the Finnish society in case of disturbances, etc. So that's quite unique, I think.
There we have another possible topic. Interesting. Thank you very much, Jussi. Claire, anything that you want to add before we wrap up from the government's perspective? No. Okay. Thank you very much. So, as I've mentioned a couple of times today, we are recording tonight's event, and we will be turning it into our usual podcast. If you are not already subscribed to the Nordic Horizons podcast, I would absolutely recommend that you do, available through all good podcast providers. If you're interested, you can find a link to podcasts on our website, along with a whole host, wealth of information resources on this event and many others from our past. If you don't already receive our monthly or so newsletter, then you can, of course, drop us an email at Nordic Horizons at hotmail.co.uk, and we will add you to our newsletter distribution list as well. And of course, we have our Facebook group. So those of you who are not on our Facebook group can join that for information and discussion as well. I just want to thank our speaker tonight, Jussi Toivanen. Thank you so much, Jussi. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And Chris, for your response, really valuable input there. And to Claire as well, giving the Scottish Government's perspective. And to everyone else who's posted comments and questions in the chat, thank you very, very much. I will definitely remember from tonight the idea of retractable towers and turning Hollywood into a library. Those should be the images for our podcast, I think. But I'm going to hand over to Leslie now, who's going to talk about what's next for Nordic Horizons. Over to you, Leslie.
Eek. Well, actually, you've pretty much just stolen my thunder there, because the next few things we are going to do will be podcasts. We have a variety of sort of face-to-face events and podcasts. The next one is going to be a podcast actually about cooperatives, since I mentioned them in Finland, funnily enough, looking particularly at the massive S group, which I'm sure that Jussi has probably got a card, a member of, because there are 3 million members of the S group in Finland. It's one of the world's largest cooperatives. Yes, you do. Yes. But not only that, just to whet your appetite, I mean, one other statistic, one of the largest forestry cooperatives has got 100,000 members who own half the forests in Finland. And Scotland, just to give us that awful statistic again, we have 430 people who own half the private land of Scotland. So it's an extraordinarily different setup, co-ops everywhere. And the next podcast that will be put up online on Sunday is all about how they actually work. So if you want to know more about that, we might follow it up with an actual event about cooperatives if we get a bit of a response on that one. So listen to this. I'm a bit biased because I'm quite involved in making these podcasts, but they're pretty good little listens for about 40 minutes a time. So anyway, you can get all the back catalogue if you look at NordicHorizons.org and just select the podcast and register.
Brilliant. Thank you, Leslie. And thank you to everyone for joining tonight's event. We hope to see you at another one soon. I'm going to end the recording just now, and we will wish you a good night and see you all later. Bye for now.
Good night, all.
Nice one. Well done, Dan Gwynn. That was very, very good. Excellent. That's tremendous. You did that really well.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed that.
And he was great. Yeah.
He was great in the end, wasn't he? Although I have to say, when it came on 47 slides, I thought, but he didn't use them all. He was very, very good.